want to ask your prayers, particularly about one item. You will head down this way here, Dennis Terrell, and lead us in prayer. Someone mentioned in Bible class, and I forget, every time we send someone off to a mission point, we always have a special prayer of send-off. And in our class this morning, I was reminded that I'm leaving this Friday. Everybody's excited. I'm going to be gone for a couple of Sundays. Lessons might be shorter, better for sure. But nonetheless, I do covet your prayers as I head to Nicaragua and do a little bit of a work down there. And there's a preacher seminar going on. And Dennis, if you would lead us in a prayer, and everybody, would you stand with me as we have this special prayer?
Let's pray together. Dear Most High, loving Heavenly Father, we come to you and ask your blessing on David as he goes down to Nicaragua for the preacher seminar. We pray for a safe trip. We pray that much good will come from his visit. That the preachers down there will be uplifted and encouraged, and that you'll have a safe trip back home to us. We also pray for the speakers that are going to be substituting for David while he's gone. We pray that they'll bring messages that are encouraging and uplifting and enlightening for us. All these things we ask in your Son's holy name. Amen.
Amen. Do keep our mission work in your prayers. We're talking about that in our class on Sunday morning. We definitely need God's help in all these efforts. We can't make one step without Him. This morning, after this morning, we have a place, by the way. I'm sure there's some people that are ready to go for it. But this morning, I want to talk about spiritual direction. There's a passage you're probably very familiar with. It comes out of the book that Paul wrote to the Corinthians, the second letter that he wrote. And it says in chapter 5, when we walk by faith, not by... You've heard that verse before. John writes in 1 John chapter 1, along about verse 7, for if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses us of all sin. There's that spiritual walk being discussed again by another author. And you can go all the way back to the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, chapter 5, and there's a long list of these patriarchs, as it were. People who lived a phenomenal number of years. All these different names, and there was one that really stood out in verse 24. Different than the others, and it said that Enoch walked with God. What we do in this life is described quite often in the Bible as a spiritual walk. And so I want to talk this morning about our spiritual direction, our spiritual walk, and understand some things. And at the very basic is what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 15. And I'll just be honest, I forgot the verse number. I do remember the passage, though. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 10. If you want to look that up in your Bibles. But Paul says, by the grace of God, I am what I am. And he sees himself, I'd say, in a good relationship with God. But he doesn't claim that he's done any of this by himself. Matter of fact, in another letter, he will write at length about his Jewish pedigree. He was a Hebrew of the Hebrews, he uses the terminology. In other words, even for the Hebrews, he was somebody special. A Pharisee, zealous in everything, obedient to the law. And he goes on and he says, but I count all of those things but loss. And so there's nothing that he says really that he's done by himself. And I use those thoughts as we begin to talk about spiritual direction for us to understand, number one, where we are today is by the grace of God. Now, yes, you did some doing and some choosing, but I'm so grateful for people that God sent my way at just the right time when I was ready to listen to the gospel. Now, I didn't know what they were planning at that time and what God was working. But I can confidently tell you it's God's providence that brings us wherever we are. And so wherever you are, just in the start with, on your spiritual direction, don't look in the mirror and say, boy, look what I've done. Because you'll be following right in the faulty line of the Pharisee who went into the temple and Jesus described, and he prayed, he said, "Good Lord, I thank you, I'm not like this person over here because I fast often, I do this. Look at how much I've done. Look at my spiritual direction." And he was totally off track. For wherever we are, it's by the grace of God. And you might look around and see some other people around you and kind of wonder, where are they? Not maybe judging, but just out of curiosity. And not really knowing, particularly by age or dress or the ability to walk or not to walk. Matter of fact, I've seen some people that have a sense of strong spiritual direction that aren't able to walk. And yet they are locked in step, in another way, with what God directs, and their heart and their prayers and their efforts and their speech just oozes with following God and directed with Him. But again, we have to say even that it's by the grace of God. And so as we start out in talking about this idea of spiritual direction, I want you to see what's happening. At the same time, I want you to think about what went on in the book of Numbers. Now, this is not the Christian age. This is going back to the Old Testament. But it's the people of God. And these people, as you reach in the book of Numbers, in the context of what's going on, have just left Egypt. They have been enslaved for 400 years by Egypt. And they were beaten and cruelly mistreated. They built, I guess, a lot of these fantastic monuments that we still see today. At least we're a part of that. And so here these people are marching out of Egypt, and God wants them to go over to the promised land. And they're itching to go, but they send some spies out, being smart, and the spies come back. And in Numbers chapter 14, the report of the spies come. Now 12 of them went out and came back, but 10 of them, when they came back, giving the same report of what they saw, had a different perspective about what they could do. They said, "We cannot go." And so those 10 people, as it were said in Numbers 14, spread a bad report among God's people. So much to the point that when you look at what's going on, they give up. Now, I want you to notice some things. In Numbers 14, it says that they spoke to one another and they said, "Let us select a leader and return to Egypt." Now, if you were to ask these people, "Are you followers of God?" they'd say, "Definitely so." "Do you believe in following wherever He leads?" "Definitely so." And yet we know what God is revealing to us is their spiritual direction was, we're going back. Wrong direction. God says, cross over, go do this, and now they're ready to go back home, where they were slaves. Now, as you think about it, would you say their spiritual direction's good? No. Definitely not. And yet, as we stop and think about who we are and analyze our spiritual direction, not everybody else's sitting around you, but our own spiritual direction. Be careful as you analyze it. Be cautious in your directing yourself and how you see things. Be thankful that God's got you where you're at. But let's really look carefully at how we decide things and where we go. Because showing up on Sunday morning is not a major thing. So we go lots of places all throughout the week that I go to Walmart sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. It's just my car knows how to drive itself down there. But that doesn't mean that I work at Walmart or live at Walmart or I have stock in Walmart. I don't think I spend as much time there as I do here at the building, thank God. But the thing is, being here doesn't make you be going the right direction. So we've got to stop and think about who we are and what we're up to here. Now look at the life of Paul, for instance. Before he became a Christian, he was known as Saul. And maybe you read a little bit from the book of Acts, and you know, by having read that sometime before, that Saul persecuted the church. Would you say he had the right spiritual direction? No. But he felt like he did. He was very zealous in what he was doing, but it was totally opposite of what God was after. And if you've read chapter 9, you remember that Saul was on his way to another city to persecute more Christians in that city because he pretty well cleaned house back in one place. And so now he's headed to Damascus, and a bright light shines and blinds him on the road. Little discussion between the Lord and Saul realizes he's done wrong. And he's now going to have to be led by the hand, because he can't see anymore, into the next town where he was going to be this triumphant, powerful, victorious leader cleansing out the Christians in that area. And all of a sudden he's this weak little whimpling that can't get around without the help of maybe some old man or woman guiding him. Humbly now, blinded, he finally takes a look at his spiritual direction as he has a discussion with a man named Ananias, who talks to him about the Lord and helps him to see where his true spiritual direction ought to be. Sometimes it takes a little blinding for us to be able to open our eyes and see our spiritual direction. How about you? I don't know. But I'd like to be able to see myself clearly in the mirror and see what truly is inside there. Psalm 23, verse 1. I bet you can quote this passage. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'm going to give you a new ending for that part. It fits within the context, and I think it's descriptive. The Lord is my shepherd, I don't get to drive. You know what I mean? It means that the Lord's doing the driving, He's the shepherd, I'm just sitting here. Now, man, how many of y'all like to be the driver? Yeah, lots of you. I want to be in control, I want to be driving. A friend of mine who was a missionary over in Latin America for a long number of years, he said, it's amazing, he said, to watch the people get on the airplanes, especially the Latin Americans, but not picking on them, we're all that way, but they're a little more fervent in their prayer life. He said, when they get on the plane, they do this real quick. Okay? They're saying a prayer, in other words. Because they're not driving the airplane. He said, but it's amazing, when they get in the car, it's like, now I'm in control. I'm driving. The Lord is my shepherd, I don't get to drive. Not only is it all that I need, but I don't get to drive. And that's what I want you to understand as we start looking at our spiritual direction. I don't get to drive. The Lord gets to handle the steering wheel. He makes the turns. He puts the brakes on. He'll slow down when he feels like it's important to slow down. And sometimes I think things run too slow, or too fast, or go another way. But the Lord is doing the driving. And sometimes it takes me through a path that I don't want to go. And you see, that is exactly what the psalmist is talking about. Even through the valleys of the shadow of death, the Lord's going to be driving. And I'm just going to ride along. I'm here for the ride, Lord. Okay, so start out now in your mind thinking about your spiritual direction. And remember, it's because of the Lord you're there. Let Him do the driving. He does a better job. Then, number 2, with that in mind, where I am tomorrow depends on what I do today. And you say, now, but wait a minute, you just got through saying that the Lord's doing all this stuff. Now, yeah, that's true. But He's expecting you to step up and do some things. To get in the car with Him and go those places. So if you don't get in, you aren't where He wants you to be. Again, where I am tomorrow depends on what I do today. Now this falls in line with what we started out talking about even at the beginning of the year and before that time as we discussed goals. You remember when we talked about this back before Thanksgiving? We said, if you don't start naming your goals now, when Thanksgiving comes, it's going to all fly by and January's going to be here and you still don't have a goal. Do you have one? I'll bet you in this audience there's some people that are still thinking, I forgot to do that. It's February. But it's still not too late. So as you're looking at what's going on here, remember that if you want to be over here tomorrow, then you've got to start going that direction today. Because you're not going to be over on the other side tomorrow unless you start going that way. It's not like tomorrow you wake up and, oh, here I get to be where I'm at. You've got to start moving that way. My direction depends on what I'm doing today. And as we've talked about a few times, the definition of insanity, remember, is keep doing the same thing over and over again, but someday you're going to get a different result? I don't think so. So you're going to have to make some changes in order for something different to happen. Okay. So we have to be careful what I decide. Being very careful. Now turn with me to Luke chapter 12. We'll kind of get a little bit of a vision of what's happening here. And I talked about this before. For those visiting, my wife teaches second grade. I get some of the most interesting illustrations out of that class for sermons and other things too. What goes on in their idea of what's important is different than what the teacher's idea is most of the time. So when she says no more questions unless it's really important, if you're bleeding or whatever, you can come to me, but otherwise sit there and be quiet. And one little child goes, this Schonhoff, this Schonhoff? Yes. When are we having snack? Well, that's what's happening right here. Jesus is in this very intense discussion about spiritual direction. And about the time he really gets to a pause, verse 13, it says, then one from the crowd says, teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. It's like flat forehead movement. We're talking spiritual things. Why are you worried about what's going on the earth? And so he tells a parable to everybody that's listening and to this guy too. And for all of us who live afterwards to stop and think about where we want to be tomorrow depends on what we're doing today. So he says, take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life, or your spiritual direction, in other words, doesn't consist in the abundance of the things you possess. And then he goes on and tells this parable. The ground of a certain man, rich man, yielded plentifully. Now he's already rich. And everything that he put into it just multiplied over. So he's a millionaire to start with, several, and then everything turns around and multiplies several times more. You'd call him filthy rich. I guess the best term to describe him. So he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I'll do this. I will pull down my barns, and I'll build greater. And there I will store my crops. And I'll say to my soul, you've got many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God will say to him, fool, for this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things of which you have provided be? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The rich man, as we're looking at this, is missing this whole concept of direction. And when everything falls in his lap, I want you to notice what he doesn't say as Jesus is unveiling the parable. He doesn't look around and say, I'm already rich. I wonder what the church can do with this. I wonder who I can help with all this extra. I didn't have a place to store it. Rather than thinking about what I could do for all these people out here that really need things, I'm going to stack up more. You see, he's not even thinking toward people, toward who's in need, toward the synagogue or the church or however you want to take that direction. Not thinking about God and what God has done. Thank you, Lord. Look at how I've been blessed. I don't need all of this. Let me see what I can do. And where he was the next day was based upon what he did. Now, it's not always the material wealth. There's a lot of different ways that the world can get into your heart. But I want you to see how smart Satan is. And how good he is at taking what you're after and making it look good and sending you a different direction. So be mindful of that in your decisions. Understand that. Now in this whole process, I want you to realize that what I do today will depend on what I do, where I am tomorrow, depend on what I do today. But it's also a recognition of the point that I am responsible for where I'm going to be tomorrow. Do you get that? My decision on what I do. I am in charge of my life. God says, you, David, that's me, choose where you'll be. And if you choose something different, don't go blaming somebody else. You're the one responsible. I can't blame the world for my situation and my problems and my sorrows and my difficulties and my headaches. Now, granted, if somebody's been beating on my head with a hammer for a while, there's some relationship going on. But I can move a bit. I'm still responsible for my situation. We look in the media today and things that are going on around our nation, and everybody points a finger somewhere else. Not my fault. This happened and that happened. All these other things. And we stockpile all this stuff and say, wait a minute. Who did this? This person did. Then he is responsible for his choices. And the Bible defines that real well. So look at Acts chapter 16 for just a moment. And I want you to see it from a spiritual standpoint. You get there before me read it, no. Okay, now Paul has been on missionary journeys. And as he's been involved in a lot of these things, not everything always goes the way you think it'd be. For the guy that is following everything that the Lord says to do, you think the Lord would give him a hand and help him and kind of ease the way along the direction. But that's not so. And you know that in your life. And it wasn't that way in Paul's either. So Paul finds himself having some issues and he gets it thrown into prison. And it says in verse 22 that the multitude rose up together against him. The magistrates tore off their clothes out of anger now and commanded them, that is Paul and Silas, that's his companion, to be beat with rods. That doesn't sound like some whippy little string. And when they laid many stripes on them, they threw them into prison, commanding the jailer to keep them securely. Now, having received such a charge of keep them really secure, he puts them in the inner prison. That's where they have the color TV, the air conditioning. The inner prison, and fasten their feet with stocks. They can't even move. You know, when I lay down at night, I wiggle around a little. I like to move some. He's locked in. He's been beaten. He's probably bleeding all over, bruised and beaten up. And it'd be a great opportunity for him to say, you know, I'm kind of tired of this. If these people don't like this, they can tell me a little bit differently and I could just go somewhere else. But this is ridiculous. God, I've done all these things like you told me to do. On the way to Damascus, you remember, I converted and I started preaching. Now, give me a break here. I mean, all kinds of things. And the next passage, it's interesting because you find it says that at midnight, let me see if it's still there. It didn't go away. Yep, it's still there. At midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Now, I want you to see what's going on here, because there's a circumstance. Most of the jailers would have looked at this and said, these are criminals. We're going to keep an eye on them. And as they're listening to what's going on down in the deep part of this, all they can hear is praising songs going on. And they're going, this is crazy. And the whole group that normally is a big ruckus in the evenings is all calm and quiet inside the prison. Because all the other prisoners are listening to what's going on. And their hearts are changing. And you got a man here that says, I'm still in control of my situation. I'm being thoroughly mistreated. It's unjust. I know that. They hate God. I know that. But I'm still going to praise Him. And whatever happens, happens. And a little later that night, if you've read through that, not only is there an earthquake, but you find that the jailer, the guy that was told to make sure you watch over him, invites him over to his house, washes his wounds, gives him something to eat, and listens to the gospel. Because Paul has decided, I'm still in charge of where I'm going to be, regardless if I'm in prison. So he's not going to say, well, they'll be rubbing me letters while I'm in prison, so I'm going to be mad and I'm just going to sit here. Nobody cares about me anymore. I can see that, and he can just sit back and, I'll be quiet. I'll just not say anything. No, this is a guy that's still in charge of his life and where he wants to be. Now, I want you to see this example. Because as a whole, a lot of times we want to blame everything else out there. The way the wife or the husband or the kids or the teachers or the whatever are doing me, and therefore I can't behave or I can't be, or Lord, I would do this if you just give me a little help. And Paul is fully in charge. But God's still writing. Because he'll write a letter back to those Philippian people later. The Philippian letter. And in chapter 4, verse 13, when he talks about what he can accomplish, he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So you see what's happening here. He's letting God still be driving, but he recognizes that every decision he makes moves him in the direction that he wants to be. Now, here we are, spiritual direction. So where I'm at is because of what God does. But I've got to recognize that I still have to be responsible for my choices and my decisions and the way things go. And then added to that, number 3, you can't give up. You can't give up. Did I say that? You can't give up. We give up too easily. In this life of ease and comfort nation, we've had everything so soft. Heat when we want it, air conditioning when we choose, lights whenever we want it. Very soft. Once in a while, somebody will come in and say, the electricity went off in my house. It was off for 2 hours. It's like, hey, go to Latin America. They rejoice if they got it for 2 hours. You know, it's just, my goodness. We've got it easy. Don't give up. You keep fighting. We are conditioned to failure. 2 illustrations, lessons yours. I was just watching a video on YouTube about this guy, what he thinks about success. Not necessarily spiritual, but you get good illustrations there. And he said, did you know why these big elephants that are in the circuses, well, they're not anymore, I guess, are they tie them down to those little bitty stakes with this little tiny rope. And he said, you're looking at this huge animal. He says, you know that it could rip the whole circus up. and just what and why he does it. Why that little rope keeps him tied up. It's because when he was a little baby elephant, they tied him down with this huge rope and attached him to something that was immovable. And he would tug and he'd pull and back and forth. And after a while, he'd finally say, I'm tied up. And he quit. He was conditioned that that was all he could do. After that, you could take whatever rope and whatever little stake and tie him down. And he just really could break free. He never tried again. Now, those of you that want to test that the preacher knows what he's talking about, just do a little Google search about elephants, and you'll see all these little stakes and some kind of inhumanely treated little baby elephants that are stretched out and tied down and all that. It's there. I heard some years ago about a guy that was talking about fish. And he said the walleye fish love minnows. And he said you can put one of those in these huge tanks, and you can drop a few minnows in there, and he vacuums them up with his mouth. He sucks them out, and they're gone that quick. He said, interesting experiment a guy did one day. He said, took a piece of glass, and he slid it down inside one of these fish tanks. Big walleye on one side, and he drops a few minnows over here on the other side. Now, through the water, he doesn't see the glass, and he comes in crashing into that glass, and he slams and hits that thing, and the minnows are just swimming all around, and he's attacking, he's in, and time again, after a while, he starts getting worn out. Headache, yeah, doesn't complain about it, doesn't ask for aspirin, but you can imagine, it gets to be painful. Now, after this whole episode's over with, finally the walleyes decided, I can't eat minnows anymore. He said, after that, you could reach inside, slide the glass up out of the tank, and those minnows can swim right in front of his face, and he won't touch them. He's conditioned that he can't have those. I'm afraid, as Christians, we've allowed Satan to do us that way, to condition us that we can't do this. I can't reach out with the gospel. I can't speak up because I don't have this. And too many I can't, because somehow or another we've got in our minds that, and it keeps us from moving from A to B. As a church and as individuals, it's time to move to point B. And you in your life, if the life of ease in the United States, need a little wake-up call. I do. There are things we need to get done as a Christian. We need to be somewhere. Where you're at is because of what God's done for you. But He's doing the driving. He says, would you step up and get with me? I got places to go and things to do. And recognize I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You love the Lord? Then give yourself to Him and let Him manage your direction. And follow Him faithfully. Commit to Him in baptism if you've not done that. Get right this morning if you're not following like you should. While we sing, would you come?